Some call this location the most paranormal place on the planet. Others say the whole thing is just a giant hoax. But what's undeniably true, and what makes this case so much more interesting, is that, unlike most paranormal stories, this one was put through intense scientific scrutiny. A full decade-long study was conducted here. PhDs, scientists, and specialists converged on one location and studied it almost around the clock. The findings? Pretty mind-blowing. The case I'm referring to is none other than the infamous Skinwalker Ranch. The short version is, a family bought a ranch in Utah. Almost immediately after moving in, they began witnessing strange and disturbing events. Livestock went missing or were found mutilated. They saw bizarre creatures in the woods and unexplained lights in the sky. Eventually, they contacted the media. Their story got picked up, and it caught the eye of a billionaire obsessed with the paranormal. He bought the ranch and hired a team of scientists to investigate. That investigation lasted a decade. And their conclusion? Strange things really were happening. In the northeastern corner of Utah lies a 500-acre stretch of mostly open desert. That's where Skinwalker Ranch sits. Built sometime in the late 1800s or early 1900s, it was constructed on a piece of land that had long been rumored to be cursed. Long ago, the Navajo and Ute tribes lived in the area. At one point, the Utes began capturing and selling members of other tribes, including the Navajo, into slavery with the U.S. government. When the Navajo were pushed out of the area, legend says they cursed the land before they left. They called it the Skinwalker Curse. According to the legend, this curse involves witches, skinwalkers, who take the form of large predatory animals like wolves or foxes. These entities terrorize anyone who dares to live on the land. Years later, a ranch was built right on that cursed soil. And it wasn't until the modern era, when ranch owners started reporting sightings of strange, oversized animals, that the nickname Skinwalker Ranch really began to stick. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased the ranch. The property had been abandoned for years, so they got it well below market value. They were thrilled. They bred cattle, and now they had 500 acres for their animals to roam. It seemed like a dream come true. When they moved in, the house was in disrepair, the grass was overgrown, but they didn't mind. They were too excited to care. That said, there were definitely some weird things they noticed. Every window had deadbolts on it. Not just the outside, but the inside too. All the doors had heavy-duty locks, even the interior doors. And outside, there were huge metal stakes in the ground with thick chains, clearly for massive guard dogs. Most people would stop and ask a few questions. But Terry and Gwen brushed it off. Maybe the previous owners were paranoid. Maybe it was just security for living in such an isolated place. They let it go. On the day they moved in, they had help from family members who came to unload the truck. The house sat in the middle of the property, with views in all directions except a few patches of forest. While moving things, Terry glanced toward a nearby tree line and spotted a massive wolf walking in a sort of slow, zigzag pattern toward them. It was far enough away that Terry wasn't too concerned. After all, they were ranchers. Predators were part of the job. He pointed it out to the others, and everyone stopped to watch. As the wolf got closer, Terry realized it was huge, bigger than any wolf he'd ever seen. Next to a fence, it looked at least 6 feet long. Still, it wasn't aggressive. It was wagging its tail like a friendly dog. It came right up to Terry's father, who instinctively reached out and began petting the animal, petting a wolf the size of a bear. And it acted like a tame dog, rubbing against his hand. Then, just as casually, it walked toward a pen containing a few cows and calves. One calf had its head poking through the fence. In a flash, the wolf lunged. It clamped its massive jaws around the calf's head and began trying to drag it out through the fence. It couldn't fit, but it wouldn't let go. That's when Terry and his family snapped out of their trance. Terry fired at the wolf with a handgun. It hit, but the wolf didn't flinch. They began hitting it with the blunt end of an axe, trying to save the calf. Still no reaction. Finally, the wolf let go and backed away, but not because it was injured or afraid. It just seemed to lose interest. Terry retrieved a high-powered rifle and fired again. Nothing. The wolf just slowly trotted off toward the forest. Afterward, they noticed a foul, almost chemical-like stench in the air, and they realized something wasn't right. Causing all of this madness, it got to the point where he barely slept. He was patrolling the land almost constantly, convinced that something, or someone, was intentionally tormenting his family. And then, things escalated even further. Now it wasn't just disappearing cows or floating lights. He started seeing things in the trees. Strange shapes, dark figures. Once, while out late at night, Terry swore he saw a large humanoid shape perched in a tree, something impossibly large for a tree-dwelling creature. He raised his rifle and fired. The shape dropped out of sight, and when he approached the base of the tree the next morning, he found enormous claw marks in the bark, and no trace of blood, no tracks. Nothing. Around this time, the rest of the family began having increasingly disturbing experiences. Gwen, while inside the house alone, would hear voices, sometimes whispering, sometimes calling her name from another room. Doors would slam for no reason. Items continued to vanish and reappear in strange places. The feeling of being watched was constant. Their dogs began acting out too, barking at empty fields or refusing to go outside at night. One night, after more cattle disappeared, Terry noticed strange circular impressions in the ground near where his cows had last been. Perfectly symmetrical indentations, like landing gear from a helicopter or some kind of aircraft. But there were no signs of anything actually having landed. Just the markings, and then, nothing. Eventually, it became too much. The Shermans were completely overwhelmed, emotionally exhausted, and financially devastated. They had invested everything into this ranch, but between the psychological strain and the loss of so much livestock, they were ready to get out. But before they could even list the property, a new character entered the story and would change everything. That's when billionaire aerospace mogul and government contractor Robert Bigelow heard about the Shermans' claims. He was already fascinated by the paranormal, and after reading an article about the events on Skinwalker Ranch, he reached out and made the Shermans an offer, sell him the property, and he'd continue the investigation himself, with a full team of scientists. Terry agreed, and in 1996, Robert Bigelow officially took over Skinwalker Ranch. He renamed the site under the umbrella of his new project, the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, a private scientific organization focused on the study of fringe science and unexplained phenomena. For the next several years, NIDS researchers, including physicists, biologists, and military personnel, set up equipment across the ranch. Cameras, infrared, motion sensors, radiation monitors. They were determined to get real, measurable data about what was going on. And they did. The scientists documented bizarre electromagnetic fluctuations, sightings of unidentified flying objects, sudden spikes in radiation, and temperature anomalies. Multiple team members reported seeing portals, openings in the sky or mid-air that seemed to show a different landscape entirely. One night, a NIDS scientist reported watching a large, shadowy creature crawl out of one of these mid-air portals and sprint off into the trees. And yet, for all their cameras and sensors and field journals, nothing ever happened when they were recording. Time and time again, the phenomena seemed to know when it was being observed and refused to cooperate. This is what made Skinwalker Ranch so elusive. The phenomenon wasn't just strange, it was intelligent. It responded to observation. It shifted based on attention. It played tricks on people. NIDS eventually concluded that the ranch was what they called a precognitive sentient phenomenon, meaning it somehow knew what was going to happen before it happened. By 2004, with little to show in terms of publishable scientific results, NIDS disbanded. But the legend of Skinwalker Ranch had only grown stronger. Stories about shapeshifters, UFOs, invisible creatures, electromagnetic interference, mutilated cattle, and even time slips had turned the ranch into a kind of paranormal nexus, a place where reality itself seemed to bend. In 2016, the ranch was sold again to another secretive owner, who now allows some media access. That's what led to the History Channel series, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, where scientists and investigators continue to try to unravel the mysteries of the land. And to this day, strange occurrences are still reported on the property. Is it all a hoax? Some elaborate psychological phenomenon? A military experiment gone wrong? Or is Skinwalker Ranch truly a place where the veil between worlds is thinner, where something ancient and intelligent lurks just beyond our perception? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. Skinwalker Ranch remains one of the most intensely studied and deeply chilling paranormal hotspots on Earth. Stories they've heard aren't just some elaborate misunderstanding or hoax. They bring in all kinds of scientific equipment, motion sensors, Geiger counters, infrared cameras, magnetic field detectors, you name it. They set up observation posts and start documenting everything around the clock. And almost immediately, strange things begin happening again. Just like with the Shermans, equipment would malfunction for no reason. Batteries would be fully charged, then drain instantly. Cameras would stop recording at the exact moment something unexplainable happened. Sensors would detect sudden spikes in radiation or magnetic fields, and then return to normal seconds later. One of the most bizarre incidents occurred when a team of scientists was monitoring a group of cattle near a ravine. For a brief moment, they lost visual contact with one of the cows. It was gone, vanished. They searched the area thoroughly, and then, just minutes later, they found the animal dead, inside a small, enclosed area that no full-grown cow could have possibly entered without tearing down fencing or gates. Its body showed signs of strange surgical incisions, and parts of its anatomy had been removed with surgical precision, much like what had happened during the Sherman's time. And then came the blue orbs. Interactive. The ranch wasn't haunted by ghosts or aliens or monsters. Instead, it was being affected by a precognitive sentient intelligence, something that knew how people would act before they acted, something that manipulated perception and evaded detection, something that may not just live on the ranch, but may actually be the ranch. After nearly a decade of research, a decade filled with missing time, strange entities, glowing objects, physical injuries, and data that defied logic, the NIDS team had to admit something groundbreaking, yet maddening. Something real is happening at Skinwalker Ranch, but we cannot explain what it is. Eventually, the NIDS program was shut down. The ranch quietly changed hands again in 2016, this time to a mysterious real estate magnate named Brandon Fugel, who has since opened it up for limited public research and a TV docuseries called The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. To this day, strange things continue to happen. Surveillance footage still captures odd lights and shapes. Researchers and ranch staff still report feelings of dread and moments of inexplicable fear. Visitors still describe seeing orbs, losing time, or witnessing creatures they can't explain. Even the scientists, who were trained not to jump to conclusions, admitted there was something deeply unsettling about the orbs. The team recorded interactions with the orbs that mirrored what the Shermans had experienced: intense anxiety, physical discomfort, and confusion. One scientist reported feeling as though the orb was watching him, as if it was aware of his presence and reacting to his thoughts. And then, the infamous portal incident. While observing a ridge near the ranch, one NIDS investigator, who had night vision goggles on, saw what he described as a tunnel of light appear in the sky. Inside the tunnel, he could clearly see a large black humanoid figure crawling through it, and then dropping into the field below. Other investigators who were present without night vision saw nothing. This raised one of the most fascinating and frustrating aspects of Skinwalker Ranch. Whatever was happening seemed intelligent. It seemed to choose when and how to be seen. These weren't just anomalies. They were responses. This led the team to one of their boldest theories, that the phenomena were not random but, so is Skinwalker Ranch a playground for interdimensional beings? A military experiment gone rogue? A sacred, cursed land tied to ancient native rituals? A living, intelligent entity that's interacting with us in ways we're not equipped to understand? As they're driving their truck along a fence line to do routine maintenance, they pass a group of cattle that had gathered in a small field. Nothing seemed off. All the cows looked calm and healthy. Terry and Gwen even counted them, made a mental note of them, and then continued down the fence line. Just 45 minutes later, they drive back up that same stretch of road, and now one of the cows, a 1,200-pound bull, is gone. Completely vanished. They slam on the brakes. Terry jumps out. He knows that a bull doesn't just disappear in 45 minutes. There's no broken fence, no trampled ground, no sound was heard, and no blood. This is a massive animal, and it's just gone. They begin frantically searching the area, and eventually, Gwen happens to glance at an old, rusted-out trailer nearby. It was a completely enclosed container with no open doors, and the windows were sealed. Gwen walks over, peeks inside through a small crack in the metal, and nearly screams. The bull is inside the trailer, completely still, crammed unnaturally inside like it had been teleported or dropped in there. Terry rushes over and flings the door open. As the light hits the bull, it suddenly wakes up, like it had been sedated, and starts thrashing violently inside, practically destroying the container. Terry and Gwen back away in shock. The NIDS team, after inspecting the scene, is once again at a total loss. There is no physical way the bull could have entered that trailer. Not without opening doors that hadn't been touched. Not without disturbing the dirt or fence. Not without making a sound. It's as if, somehow, the bull had phased through solid matter. And then they found something else. Right around the container, on the ground, they picked up strong electromagnetic readings, much higher than normal. In fact, one of their instruments recorded a spike in radiation, as if a burst of energy had occurred right around the time the bull disappeared. This became a pattern. Whenever something truly bizarre happened, an animal mutilation, a light sighting, a disappearing object, there was almost always evidence of high radiation, magnetic disturbances, or localized time distortions. One researcher even reported watching the stars above the ranch begin to rotate, like the sky itself was being manipulated. Over the next few years, these phenomena continued. But despite dozens of incidents, no clear pattern ever emerged. No event could be predicted, and none of the entities or phenomena could be captured or studied in any repeatable, scientific way. It was like the phenomena knew they were being watched and deliberately avoided exposure. After nearly a decade of intense study, the NIDS team published a vague but stunning conclusion. We are dealing with a non-human intelligence, operating in a highly unpredictable and evasive manner that appears to possess capabilities far beyond current scientific understanding. Eventually, NIDS was shut down. The ranch changed hands again. And to this day, Skinwalker Ranch remains one of the most investigated, most mysterious, and most terrifying locations on the planet. Some believe it's a tear in reality. Some say it's a hotspot for interdimensional travel. Others think it's tied to ancient curses or hidden technology. But everyone agrees on one thing. Something is happening at Skinwalker Ranch, and it's something we can't explain. Some call this place the most paranormal location on Earth. Others say it's just one big hoax. But what makes this case so fascinating is that, unlike most paranormal stories that are dismissed as folklore or exaggeration, this one was the subject of a decade-long scientific investigation. PhDs and professional researchers converged on one location and studied it around the clock, trying to get to the bottom of what was really happening there. And after years of research, the findings were unsettling. The place I'm talking about is none other than the infamous Skinwalker Ranch. A quick summary. A family buys a 500-acre ranch in northeastern Utah, and as soon as they move in, they begin experiencing bizarre phenomena. Cattle disappear or are mutilated in strange ways. Lights appear in the sky. They see strange creatures in the woods. Eventually, the story reaches the media. A billionaire obsessed with paranormal research buys the property and installs a full-time team of scientists to investigate the strange claims. They spend 10 years studying the area, and what they find suggests that something truly strange is going on. The property had a dark history even before the family moved in. According to legend, the land was cursed during a feud between the Navajo and Ute tribes. As the story goes, the Navajo placed a curse on the land involving a creature known as a skinwalker, a witch capable of transforming into predatory animals. The idea was that these beings would haunt and torment anyone who lived there. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased the ranch. It had been abandoned for years, so they got it at a bargain price. They bred cattle, and 500 acres of open land was ideal for letting their herd roam. But the moment they moved in, they noticed strange things. The house had deadbolts on every window and door, inside and out. There were large chains in the front and backyard, apparently for massive guard dogs. They brushed it off at first, thinking the previous owners were just overly cautious. That same day, as they were unloading boxes, Terry noticed a massive wolf slowly approaching from the tree line. It was 6 feet long, calm, and strangely unthreatening. It came right up to them, even allowing Terry's father to pet it on the head. But then, without warning, it lunged at a calf and began attacking. Terry and his son fired multiple rounds into the creature, but it seemed unfazed. They hit it with an axe, nothing. Eventually, it let go and casually trotted off into the woods. Terry and his son tracked its huge paw prints into the forest, but the prints just stopped. No blood trail. No explanation. It had vanished. In the days that followed, Gwen experienced bizarre memory lapses. She would put away groceries, then come back and find them back in their bags. She'd hang up a towel, take a shower, and find the towel missing, later discovering it neatly folded in a closet on the other side of the house. Terry himself left a 70-pound fence digger by a post, went inside, and returned to find it missing. A week later, he found it suspended 70 feet up in a tree. They began seeing strange lights on the property. What looked like headlights would appear on distant parts of the ranch, but when Terry approached them, they'd rise silently into the air and vanish. One night, he saw an object like a stealth fighter hovering silently among the trees, scanning the ground with colored lights. When he made the slightest noise, it instantly turned toward him, then flew off. As winter came, the cattle began vanishing. Footprints would lead into the woods and just end. No blood, no sign of struggle. Some cows did turn up again, but they were mutilated. Body parts were removed with surgical precision. No blood, no scavenger marks, just clean, sterile incisions. At night, they saw black humanoid figures walking the property. Faceless, tall, emotionless, they would walk right up to the windows and peer inside. Terry's kids couldn't sleep. Gwen lost her job due to exhaustion and stress. They heard the entities tapping on the glass, speaking in a language they didn't recognize. They locked every door and window, but it didn't matter. The figures always came back. One night, Terry saw an orange orb floating in the distance. He raised his rifle with a scope and looked through it. What he saw wasn't a light, it was a portal. Through the oval-shaped glow, he could see blue sky. In the middle of the night, a humanoid black figure was crawling out of the portal into his field. Then the orb vanished. After that, they began seeing blue orbs, described by the family as the most terrifying thing of all. Whenever a blue orb came near, it radiated an overwhelming sense of fear and anxiety. One night, 3 of Terry's dogs chased one of these orbs into the woods. Moments later, he heard them yelping. The next morning, he found 3 piles of ashes in burned-out circles where his dogs had been. They had been vaporized. Terry had had enough. He put the ranch up for sale and gave an interview to the local news. The story caught the attention of Robert Bigelow, a billionaire deeply invested in the paranormal. He bought the ranch and moved in his research team, the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS. These weren't fringe believers. Bigelow hired PhDs, physicists, and scientists, most of whom were skeptical of the paranormal. In their first year, they ruled out every logical explanation they could. No hallucinogenic plants, no tainted water, no psychological issues with the Sherman family. And then, the activity returned. Smell vanished, and the compasses reset point one day. Terry and Gwen tagged a newborn calf. They left it for just 45 minutes. When they returned, it had been dissected, legs and head intact, but every organ and drop of blood was gone. The cuts were clean and professional, as if done in an operating room. There was no sign of predators or trauma. Nearby guard dogs were cowering in their cages, staring toward the tree line. Later, the same thing happened with 4 of their most valuable bulls. Terry and Gwen saw them in the corral, left for an hour, and returned to find the bulls gone. Panicked, Terry noticed an old, sealed trailer nearby. He looked through a window and saw all 4 bulls crammed inside, calm, unmoving. As soon as he shouted for Gwen, they snapped out of their trance and began kicking wildly. It took hours to get them out, but the trailer had not been opened. The doors were still wired shut, and cobwebs around the seal were undisturbed. NIDS found one section of the corral had been highly magnetized. Later, while scanning for electromagnetic fields on the property, 2 researchers encountered the same rotting metallic smell described during wolf sightings. Their compasses began spinning wildly and pointing toward the source of the smell, as if something magnetic and invisible was nearby. Then the most terrifying event occurred in 1997. 2 NIDS researchers were positioned on a ridge watching the ranch. Suddenly, an orange orb appeared near the homestead. One researcher looked through infrared goggles and saw it was a portal, and a large, black humanoid figure was crawling out. It hit the ground and began sprinting up the hill, toward them. They could hear the crunch of shale under its feet. It passed just 30 feet from them and disappeared into the mountains. After 1998, activity began to die down. By 2004, NIDS pulled the plug. They had mountains of data, hundreds of eyewitness accounts, radiation spikes, magnetic anomalies, mutilated animals, but no definitive proof. The phenomena always stayed one step ahead. Some believe it was one entity. Others think it was multiple. But the researchers agreed on one thing. Something intelligent was behind it, and it was not of this world. To this day, Skinwalker Ranch remains one of the most intensely studied paranormal sites in history. The mystery continues. And the question remains, what's really out there?